than 8:15, but if we feel like we accomplished what we need to prior to that, we'll just kind of make sure we end a little bit more organically there. But I just want to reiterate what Terry said. First of all, it's amazing that all of you are up and online this morning at 7:30. That chat window is open. And so while I am going to share some content or some information with you this morning, I think this is probably more importantly, a time for us to connect again, to do some follow-up from when we were together last month, and then to be able to answer your questions related to this idea of, am I doing this work? Am I doing the right work? Am I doing this right? So throw out your questions on that chat. In just a second, I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see some slides, which will make it difficult for me to see the chat. And so Terry will watch that. But then at any time, just like raise your hand. Like if you literally need to raise your hand and unmute yourself and interrupt me. This really should be far more conversational than anything else, all right? So I'm going to assume we're all ready to go. Yep. No? Yep. Okay. Let me share my screen with you. And do you all see the slide deck? Perfect. Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do is just a little connecting back to when we were together at the end of last month. So I just have 3 questions. And you can either just do some thinking on your own, or if you want to jot down a response, whatever works. I'm going to give you a couple of quiet minutes here. What still resonates with you from what we talked about when we were together? What has changed? So are there ideas that we explored, things that we talked about, maybe that you were really gung-ho about, and then you did some more talking when you got back to your districts, and now you're thinking about it has changed? Or maybe it's just the opposite. Maybe you thought, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And then with a little more time, you thought, well, actually, maybe there's something there. So I want you to think about things that have resonated, things that have changed, and then any questions that you have that you want to be sure to have answered today. So I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of thinking, and then contribute your response in that chat window. All right, so I'm going to stop that screen share so I can just be on that chat window for a minute.
Awesome.
As soon as you're ready, just in the chat window, just respond to everyone, and either something that resonated, something that's changed, or a question that you have. Thanks, Tiffany.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, the beginner's mindset.
Yep.
Thanks, Anne and Kara.
Like that one.
Yeah. Kind of the self-promotion idea.
Yeah.
And then I think certainly the difference between maybe how some of you are seeing model teachers, but then maybe the mentality that's still in your district, right? That can be tough. Great question, Mary Beth, about engaging learners in that way. So we'll try to get there today. If we don't get there in this particular session, I think we'll get to it in the Zoom number 2, which is the 3 o'clock session this afternoon. And so that might be worthwhile, at least to catch the recording. Yep. Okay, and great question about the getting teachers into the classroom. Okay. Lots of great feedback. And I think we see a lot of patterns here in the things that you're contributing right now. I'm sure you see it too as you're all reading along. But yeah, I think that we see a lot of patterns in terms of the thinking about a model teacher, embodying this beginner's mindset. And then it kind of seems like, but now what, right? We have this understanding, we have this idea, but now what do we do with it? And I think that's just exactly the place that we need to be. And that's exactly where you should be right now. So if you're not beyond it, especially given that we just had 2 days and it's only been, 3 weeks since then, that doesn't mean that everything has changed in 3 weeks, right? This is a very slow process that takes lots of deliberate kind of behavior changes, not only on our part, but on others. And so we will get there, but I know that it can seem like it takes a long time. So let's go ahead and kind of work through a couple of ways to think about this work. I think I mentioned this when we were together a couple of weeks ago, but I think it's worth reiterating that this work that we are doing is really about planting seeds. It really is about having one good conversation, one good question at a time. And that's really how we're going to see the change. We are, I think as teachers and as systems of education, we are more used to top down, right? We are more used to somebody coming in and saying, this is how it's going to change. And so that feels like this storm of change. Really what we are talking about is the inverse of that. And if you think about especially the role of teacher leaders, and you think about what is behind the spirit of TLC, it's about planting seeds, and it's about finding ways to do that. So what I'm going to offer here for just a little bit are some ways in which you might think about this notion of planting seeds, or this notion of being able to start doing this work. And then we'll have some time to kind of process that. So the first thing that I would say is you can start with questions. And I think you can start with your own questions. And these are things that you can become transparent about, right? So these are the kinds of things that you have to not only start to ask on your own, but figure out how to start to share. So here are some things about sharing. It absolutely makes sense that some of the first people you might share this with would be other model teachers or lead teachers or coaches or other people who are involved in TLC in your schools and in your buildings. If you notice here, I have kind of like 3 different kinds of questions. The first one, why is my first hour afraid to talk and share, which was a big, huge problem that I had last semester. Another question, How do I follow up when another teacher comes in our room? So that might be a question that you're posing to other TLC teachers, right? Especially other model teachers. And I think this one can be tough because we kind of wonder, do I go and talk to them afterwards? Do I just say, hey, I'm so glad you came? Or how do you share with them? And what I would say is that I think one of the most effective ways to start to share our process with other teachers is not necessarily to say, this is why I did what I did, but to say, this was the question that I had. This is what I'm curious about. This is what I'm investigating, right? All of those different kinds of things. And then another question down here that's kind of one of those problems of practice, right? So again, finding ways to start with those questions. Maybe you make these questions public, right? So maybe there's a place in your room where you write the question that you're pursuing. Maybe it's outside of your door. Maybe it's on a slip of paper, and anybody who comes in, can take that question and take a look at it when they do come into your classroom. And even if you're having trouble getting people into your classroom, starting these habits now can be really important, right? So part of this work of being a model teacher is not just waiting until people get in, but it right now is working on establishing your own habits of mind, your own practices about what it means to kind of be in process as a learner. Okay. Another way that you can start is by taking a lot of photos. And I would say this is really huge, just because we want to start to document. And a lot of times having something tangible that you can talk to your colleagues with, or you can talk to your students about, or you can even bring to, if you have TLC kind of team meetings, and being able to bring something that's concrete to those discussions is really important, because I'm sure that you know how this goes. A lot of times as teachers, we reflect really quickly, right? We reflect, while we are at the photocopy machine with our lunch in one hand and trying to get ready for class in the other hand. And we might say things like, well, that went well, or that didn't go well, which may be true. But when we do that, we also filter everything kind of through our own bias. And so being able to start to gather concrete evidence can be important. So if you remember that, I'm going to say this one thing about concrete evidence. If you remember when we practiced our forms of observation, right? So the idea that you are going to observe for student learning first, and then you're going to figure out which teacher moves impacted that. I would say with your camera, start to try to take pictures of moments of student learning. So, and it can be something that's static, like I've taken a picture here, like the bulletin board with these hero things that the kids worked on. It could be over here. I have these doors in the classroom that are whiteboards. And so these are the products of some of the conversations that we had in class, or I'm taking pictures of ways that I see students learning. But rather than just thinking about, I'm just going to take pictures of the class, if you take pictures of student learning, not only are you going to start to capture them, but it also means you're going to start to look for them. And that's kind of the center of talking transparently, right? The center of being able to talk transparently is being able to focus on those moments of student learning. You could also work through video if you wanted to. So I would say this about video. I know I kind of introduced this to you when we were together recently, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about this. Keeping with the same notion of starting with student learning, moments of student learning, that's also what I would try to get video of to start with. So rather than saying, I'm going to video myself and then look at how I am teaching, you could actually just start walking around with your phone, or if there's a small camera that you want to, you have to check out or whatever. And just start taking video where you see moments of student learning. Okay. And I think that that might be a good place to start. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute before we continue just to see if anybody has questions. If you want to add ideas, now is a great time to do that. I'm going to stop the screen share so I can also see anything that pops up in that chat window. So you can either raise your hand and talk in that chat window. So a great question here about the pineapple chart. So Tiffany, I'll be sure to respond to that here in just a second. We'll give everybody else a chance to process or offer feedback. Tiffany, if you wouldn't mind unmuting, I would love, I'm going to read what Tiffany put in the chat room, and then I would love if I could ask you just a couple of follow-up questions. So she wrote that they started the pineapple culture chart at their school. People have jumped on board with it in a way that the staff usually does not, but they've been hesitant to ask for feedback and embrace the problem of practice. How do we get people to do that? Tiffany, if you could maybe just unmute and hop on and just share with us what you've done so far.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So what we did was last week in PD, we kind of set up, we have two buildings, an elementary building and a middle school and high school building. And in the teacher's lounge copy area in both buildings, we made a gigantic bulletin board of the pineapple chart.
Okay.
And then at PD, when we had everyone together, whole district, we introduced the idea. We talked about how to do it. We shared that blog post that you shared with us about it. And we read that together and kind of did a reflection piece with partners and things like that to see how other schools have embraced it. And then we had all the materials ready. We had pineapples ready, sticky clips ready, the feedback charts that just said, please give me feedback on, and then it had a colon, and it was laminated, so you could just write and erase and hang all that stuff up. And we said, if you feel comfortable, come get your pineapple charts on the way out. If you don't, we'll be around to talk to you and answer more questions. And pretty much everybody got a pineapple and got all their stuff. And as we walked around the building the next day, quite a few staff members, a good half, had their pineapples up, and most of them were turned out so you could come in. They're very open to having people come in, which is not usual for our staff.
Yeah.
So we were thrilled about that. And within a couple of days, people had been hanging up different activities that were going on in their classroom on the pineapple chart. So they're using the pineapple chart as well. However, I've only seen one teacher that has the feedback out.
Yep.
And that's one of our teacher leaders, and they had the feedback chart out and they had something on it. And, I've asked several other teacher leaders, hey, can you do this? And, they said they would, but I haven't seen them out yet. So that's one thing that people have been really hesitant to use, is that kind of that problem of practice idea. And we talked about it at the PD. We told them what it was about, that we're all working on things, talked about the problem of practice and we can learn together. And we kind of said, you can do that if you want or you don't have to. And most people have chosen not to. So I was wondering if you had any idea of how we can get staff to embrace that portion as well.
Yeah, well, so first of all, I'm wanting to stand up and give you bravo here. That's awesome. I think you have so much to be excited about. I think that's a huge first step, to be honest with you. I think if you have that many people who are at least open to the idea, right? So something has happened that has taken these doors probably that are traditionally closed, and they at least have been opened. So I think that is worth a ton, and you shouldn't be too hard on yourself. I also think that it's really fascinating. It makes a lot of sense that the first person to ask for feedback was somebody who is a teacher leader. And so what I would do is I would actually start with teacher leaders. And I would say, will you be willing to ask for feedback? And then I would see if you can get either a coach, a mentor teacher, a lead teacher model, another model, however that works, to go into the other classes and start to offer the feedback. So the fact that they're opening the door is huge. This next step is a lot more difficult, and probably because teachers are not really sure how to give feedback, maybe without being evaluative, right? They might be a little nervous that this feedback might become evaluative or come across that way, or they won't know what to say, or they won't look at the right things. And so if you can have some teacher leaders just start to become transparent about this part of the practice, I think that would be huge. And so maybe the goal, even for now to the end of the year, is to just get your teacher leaders to start to become more transparent, or to share how they got feedback and how they reacted to it. That might be really interesting, so that other teachers understand this teacher really is receptive to it, and this is how he used it, or this is how she used it. And then I think maybe set as a goal then just to maintain the open doors, use the model teachers, and then think about next steps. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Can I ask you a question about that?
Of course.
Do you think it's something that we literally need to do at PD to train the staff on how to give and get feedback, or is that taking it a step too far?
No, I think you absolutely have to do it.
Our staff was really like, we like the pineapple chart because it's so relaxed and there's and informal. So I worry about doing that would take it to that formal step, and that might shut doors.
Well, I think it depends on how you frame it, right? So if you frame it as, here are the ways in which we give feedback, that might seem overwhelming. If it's more like a conversation where a model teacher just says, hey, I just want to take a couple of minutes here and just talk about how I really used this feedback, or how it was helpful to me. If you did that and maybe had a little bit more anecdotal, where the ones getting the feedback could just talk about how it was helpful, and how they really, you know what I'm saying? Like that kind of a thing.
Yep. Okay.
That might be a good place to start, and then kind of gauge. But I think that your instinct is right, that you don't want to go backwards. So I would go more slowly, rather than try to, do a big huge training on how to give feedback.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think some folks would love the chart. So I don't know if you're able to either take some pictures of that, or somehow share that either with me, and I can share it with others if you feel comfortable with that. But that would be great. All right, I'm going to keep going.
Not to interrupt
you.
No, I just have a question for you. Can I get your email, because then I can just send it to you quick and we can.
Absolutely. It's really easy. I'll put it in the chat right now.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Have a good day.
You too.
Yeah. Need anything from Harlan?
All right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen for just a little bit here. And just kind of offer some other ways that you can start to talk to colleagues. So you could, and I think these are again, maybe small steps, but remember, it's the accumulation of ongoing small steps that really make the change, right? It's not the big, huge program that's going to come in and save everything. These are the kinds of things that really will start to institute that change. So you might think about, as a model teacher, asking a new kind of question in your PLC, or whenever it is that you get together with teachers, right? As a model teacher, you could invite a coaching conversation. So if that means with an administrator, if that means with an instructional coach, if that's more like the scenario that Tiffany just shared with us, where as a model teacher, I'm going to invite another model teacher into my classroom just to give me some feedback, right? What you're doing is you're also modeling the process, right? So it's not just the strategy, but you're also modeling the process of what it means to be this kind of a teacher. You could even think about the conversations that you have that are really informal, you know? So if you think about the talk that you have over lunch with somebody, again, it could be, you know, I've been really curious about this thing that's happening in my classroom, or I've been wondering about, what do you ever wonder about that? And again, instead of just framing it as strategy, you know, instead of framing it as a task, if you start to even just frame that with, I've been really wondering, or I've been really struggling, or I've been something like that, I think it again can start to change some of that conversation. And then I think getting excited or uncertain in the hallway, I don't think that we should ever underestimate the importance of the conversations that we have kind of when we don't expect to have them, right? So the conversation that you have when you're standing outside of your door and the teacher across the hall is there. If you as a model teacher are starting to, again, talk about your practice, I've been really struggling. I've been, you know, really curious. I was really excited because those kinds of things, and start to just slightly open up those conversation strands. I think that can be really important. And then I want to remind you that you are probably doing more than you think that you are. It's kind of like Tiffany just shared. She just shared, you know, this wonderful example of some work that they're doing that's getting some traction. And then as we all do, right, as all of us teachers do, then we just worry about the part that wasn't quite right. And I want you to be sure to remember that, you know, you are doing more than you think. So I'm not going to go back to this particular graphic in a lot of detail, but just to remind you about that role of modeling this process, right? And that you, again, can ask for those coaching conversations. That's being a model teacher. You can have a conversation with an administrator. That's being a model teacher. There are all of these ways in which we can be model teachers. I am going to kind of talk through this just a little bit, and then we'll take any other questions. And then this document should be linked to the one that we sent you yesterday called 5 Acts of Teaching Transparently. If it's easier, I can also just send this as an individual document to Terry, and I can just have her upload it in Google Classroom. I know the font is kind of small in this particular version, but I wanted to just offer what I tried to do in my first 6 weeks of model teaching. And these are kind of organized by weeks, but that said, it's more like these are just kind of phases, and I just kind of find myself going through them over and over again. So I'm not going to read everything on here. We'll just, you know, save that for the Google Classroom, but I just wanted to offer kind of these high-level thoughts about a process you might be thinking about. So for one, for my week 1 as a model teacher, I really worked on just paying attention and trying to figure out what my problem of practice really could be. And so in order to do that, spent time, you know, formatively assessing students. I kind of surveyed them informally, interviewed them informally. I talked to a trusted colleague about the things that I was noticing in the classroom. One of those things was I had this first hour that just would not speak. It was really creepy and very unnerving for me. And so I really wanted to understand what was going on. So then week 2 or phase 2 is to kind of get deliberate about that. And so I kind of started these weekly curiosity cards. And I just said, like, this is what I'm going to be curious about. And sometimes I would share that with students. Sometimes I would just kind of post it on this clipboard in my room. And so that's one way that you could think about this. In order to also get deliberate, I really wanted to capture at least one moment of student learning each day. So that could have been one photograph where I was trying to just capture a moment of student learning. If I could capture it somewhere around what I thought that problem of practice might be, that was even better. But again, it was starting to just get in the habit. Sometimes I just wrote something down. So I just kind of walk around, have these Post-it notes like stashed all over the classroom. And so sometimes I would just write it down as I was going. Week 3 is thinking about inviting others into this process. And so again, it doesn't necessarily have to be other teachers. It could also be a coach. It could be a trusted colleague who is or isn't part of TLC. It could be an administrator if you want. But inviting that other person in for a conversation, or to have them just take, just come to observe the classroom and where are the moments of student learning that you found, to kind of do that. And then working on talking more transparently was week 4. Or kind of phase 4. And that means really trying to pay attention to the language that I use to talk about my practice. So in week 3, after in that conversation with a colleague, I actually recorded it. And so I could just go back and listen to it. And I just used my phone and, nothing fancy, but I just recorded it and I didn't share it with anybody else. It was just for me. But I just wanted to hear if I was using the language of talking transparently. And so that was one way I could do that. And then thinking about showing my work was the next step, which could be just like adding it to a journal. It could be sharing it at a PLC. There are lots of ways to kind of think about that. And then finally, to kind of choose what works. And then when I would choose what would work, then I would think about, do I want to keep pursuing this, or am I going to go on to a new topic and a new question? So I'm going to pause there again. I'm going to stop the share again and pause so that we can go back to the chat for the last few minutes here. And see if anybody has questions, any thoughts about that particular graphic, or any other big questions that you just want to throw out for the group. And Tiffany said that she sent the picture, so we'll be able to share that out, and that they were tweeting, so that's cool. Really great comment here that I think is wonderful, and thank you. I don't know the first name, so I feel horrible because I'm not going to call you by your first name.
It's Lindsay.
It's Lindsay? Okay. All right. Thanks, Lindsay. You just did a transparent thing here, right? You just did the beginner's mindset because you shared with all of us, kind of that you are so excited or so determined to get into that transparent teaching that we sometimes forget those first 2 steps. And I think that's so honest and so true, because if we don't know what we're curious about, we won't have anything to talk about, right? So going back, and doing that, I think is really important. And it doesn't necessarily have to take 2 weeks. Maybe it'll take 2 days, or maybe it'll take 3 weeks. Who knows? The process is what it is. But I think that's a really important reflection on your part, and one that I know you're not alone in. So one of the things that we'll do in this afternoon session, in that 3 o'clock session, is talk more specifically about language that we use when we want to talk transparently. And it sounds like maybe that's where some of your questions are getting close to, is kind of having questions about that. So we can certainly, use this afternoon session to delve into that. Anybody else have questions, thoughts? We'll probably put the recordings on Classroom, be my guess.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I know that you all have have busy days ahead. You got up early, whether you're on break or on your way to kiddos. Thank you so much for joining. I'm not just going to hang out here till 8:15 just to say that we did that. So if you do have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Terry, and we will continue to keep following through, and I will look forward to seeing all of you at the end of next month, okay?
Or at 3.
Or at 3 or at 4. Yeah.
Or at 4. Yep. Okay.
All right. Awesome.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording, and then hopefully when I see you at 3, I'll tell you I found the link.
Okay. That sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.